Paul said you can't mime it, though.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us here today for Casey's talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Kroner. I'm the gallery owner, and it's a pleasure to have you here for a deep dive into Casey's show, Moving Parts, which is a part of the 2024 Focus Biennial, which is called Backstories. Casey's journey to becoming a photographer is as unique as his work. He actually started his career as a litigation attorney in California before turning to photography, combining his background in literature and film history from the University of Michigan with a passion for visual storytelling. His work has been featured in National Geographic, The Daily Beast, Studio Kroner, and more. Through this body of work, Casey invites us into a world many of us have rarely seen, the behind-the-scenes life of a family circus. What I find especially compelling about Casey's work is how he captures not just the physical labor of setting up the show, but also the intimacy of the family's day-to-day life. It's as much about the grit and grind of the work as it is the beauty and connection these performers share with one another. So I'm really excited to hear more about what you have to say, what inspired this project, your approach to your work. And so without further ado, I'm going to step aside and turn it over to the man behind the lens,
All right.
Casey LeClair.
Okay. Thank you all for showing up. I guess I want to start with a real quick introduction. I conceived and named this show before I ever saw it. I was in Sweden at the time. I was living in Sweden at the time, and I came across a family circus, saw the poster. I live in the woods, half an hour walk into the town, and it was in the fairgrounds or whatever you want to call it. And I got the show excited to do something different other than just sitting in my dark apartment, or with nothing really to entertain me. I didn't have any TV or anything. So I went down to check out the show, and I get there, and right as I get to the circus tent, or the area, they were taking it down. There was no crowd at all. And so I went up to what looked like the grandfather or father who was working on a truck, and I said, "Do you speak English?" He said, "A little." "Okay." Like, are you a real family circus? He goes, "Yeah, we're a family circus." I'm like, no, is it actually your family performing? And like, yes, it's just myself and my children and grandchildren. So I said, "Do you mind if I take photographs?" So I was taking some photographs just outside the tent. They hadn't taken down the tent completely. A lot of the props were gone. The seating was gone. And his daughter, very tall, very fit woman, jumped up and grabbed onto the tent pole and started unlacing the tent. Then, without getting on the ground, she swung over and grabbed the next pole and started unlacing the tent. I'm like, wow, I bet she's a trapeze artist. I went back, and there someone looks exactly like her, but a man, her brother, unlacing the top of the tent. And as I photographed all the assembly, I realized that everyone's physical movements were most likely, it's my theory, were using the same physical attributes in building and taking down the tent as they did in their show. It was a guess, it was a theory, and I call it moving parts, because I had figured out how all the small children and grandchildren moved the light items into the caravan, all the larger kids moved the larger items into the caravan. They're basically the moving parts to go to the next town. The guy said, the father said, grandfather said, "We have another show 30 kilometers away." I'm like, "Well, I don't have a car, so I won't be able to see it." I was kind of bummed out about that because I'd read a lot of books about circus in the past, so I knew generally how they operate. It's going back through time, whether ancient Egypt to present day Ringling Brothers and Cirque du Soleil. So I named the show without ever having witnessed them perform the show. 2 months later, I moved to a rural town in California, Northern California, around the Sacramento River, rented an abandoned storefront to live there through the winter. I don't want to go, Swedish winters weren't really part of my plan. So I rented a place for 3 months, and the first week I was there, a flyer slaps up against my studio window, and it's a circus. And I know exactly where it must be. It's a very small town, 5,000 people. It's got to be the fairgrounds, because it's a county, county seat, Colusa County. So I go to the fairgrounds, the tent is already up, and I talked to Andrea, which is her right there in the large photograph. And I said, same question, are you a family circus? She said, oh yeah. Like, no, but are you really a family circus? Like, yes, our family. Like, okay, I got to see the performance. So I went and saw the performance 5 times that week. Actually, 5 days, they do double performances. So 10 times each week. And they moved from one town to the next. And then I was able to document them building the tent and dismantling it in completion. It was right around the holidays, so they said, we're going to do one more city. It just got added, which is also close to where I live, Williams, California, right on I-5. So I go follow them for the 3rd time. Again, I already knew how they built the tent, but I had extra facts by casing them and going there in advance to watch how they even mark, how they plan it. So I saw them for 3 straight weeks, twice a day, and it's almost like I told Paul when he said artist, I'm like, it's more like a thesis. I had a theory, and it came true because I just stuck with it. And so now I'm down to the artist talk, and that's how that whole process started. And it's luck and a lot of hard work, just kind of just like what I say about the family themselves. They put a lot of hard work into that. They build the tent. Pretty traditional roles in the raising the family and keeping their home are the mobile homes, right? RVs. So the mothers cook and the grandmothers cook and clean, but they're all performers and they all have that in common. So pretty fascinating to see cultural differences. The men build the tent, make sure family life is A-okay, but they all perform in the show and they're all equally part of the show. So for me, it's a fascinating process to be able to visually be able to figure out who was related to who and who married who. It's pretty fascinating. One thing, description over there is they had to hire this guy. It's called hired hands because he's a juggler. And he's also a juggler, so it's hired hands, and that's a photograph that really captures his hands in the juggler. So their brother married someone else in a different family circus, and they had to they needed someone else to replace his act, the brother's act. So it's not quite a perfect family, but it's a kind of an adopted family. So the process has been 6 years now since I started this. I showed it in California, and then I came back to Cincinnati, and Paul asked me if I had any work I'd like to show. I'm like, I haven't showed it in Cincinnati, but it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, writing and printing. And so it turned out to be 60,000 photographs. I finally deleted 30,000 because it was starting to drive me crazy. I still kept the SD cards up in case I want to revisit it. So I'm down to 30,000 right now on my laptop, right here. And
just
trying.
For this show?
What?
Just for this body of work?
Oh yes, there are 30,000. That's for the month of November. Yeah, month of November of 2018. And I've done so many iterations. That's what the display is all about. They're just iterations upon iterations upon iterations. Like I'm always trying to perfect it. Now, once Paul gave me the wall space, then I'm like, okay, well, it's kind of a bigger show than that. So Paul said, why don't we do contact strips? And I'm like, I was thinking digitally contact strips. I can just do 9 large images on a single piece of paper. And then Paul made the effort to get this set up so it's like a contact sheet. There are 101 photographs in this show, if you include the contacts. Took a lot of work. We're only getting half a photograph for the very end of the contact sheet, so I picked vertical ones to match with the overall theme of each contact sheet. So I put verticals on the very ends and horizontals in the middle to have a full picture. And with vertical, you don't need as much space, so I was able to get 5 photographs in for each one that featured on top. So that's the process. It's still a work in progress. I'm selling these small books. Each one is different because there are only 10 photographs. They're the best photograph, I think, but they're 2 different covers. Every cover is different. So every time someone buys them, they're getting a one-on-one. So that's my spiel. Any questions? I'm happy to take. I've probably taken 100, 200 questions already, so I've shown it so many times.
So you never changed the setting while you were taking these?
No.
And so how did you get the multiple exposures?
It depended on the lighting. Their lighting was kind of like this, right? Their lighting was so crazy because when the woman who's the main, Andrea, she operates the lighting when everyone else is performing because she's a soloist. She climbs the top of the tent, spins around, then she does another hoop thing around, and so she controls the music and the lighting, and I couldn't predict where it's going to be at any given moment. So you just have to run with it and take what you can. That's also the beauty of naming it Moving Parts, because it's literally about them moving parts to making a tent, to taking it down, moving to the next town over. And then the beauty was when I first saw the very first prints from the circus show, it was all stills in motion, right? Or just a single moving part, but somehow blurred by the effect. So the whole idea of naming it is very important to me. It's not only a moving part, literally moving the parts from town to town, but they're moving parts within their show, and then they keep changing costumes, so they're moving roles that they play within the show by being different characters in that one show. And it's also moving because, for instance, Andrea, that shot, it's a very moving picture, and people love the aerialists. Everyone's in awe of the aerialists. So it's a moving part of the show itself, is moving the audience themselves and having an emotional connection to the performers themselves.
So you said you've read a bunch of books on circuses
Yeah.
and stuff. So what was your earliest connection to the circus and your attraction to it?
When I was a kid, I went and saw Barnum and Bailey at, I don't even think the arena's there anymore. What was the arena called?
Cincinnati Gardens?
No, the one right after that.
Ringling? No, here
Oh,
it's
the fairgrounds.
Here was the fairgrounds.
It was where they played basketball games downtown next to the stadium.
Oh, yeah, Coliseum.
Yeah,
Oh,
Coliseum.
the Coliseum
Yeah.
down here.
Well, which looked very good. This Coliseum of all things. Talking about family circus and the origins of the circus. And I think I studied a lot of film in college and literature in college. My first application was to Owen. I was going to apply for his job out of college, and then my girlfriend said, "No, we're moving to San Francisco." So I never was a film critic or art and culture critic. So you asked a more specific question. Now I can't remember what it was.
How did you get into the circus?
Oh, into the circus. I've read about it a lot. Went to it as a kid. I think one of the first books I read out of college, doing some research on nonfiction, was Barnum's autobiography. Pretty fascinating book. If anyone's ever read it, it's worth a read about the whole idea of entertainment in our life, what it means.
So you mentioned, in what I introduced was that you're really into storytelling. You studied literature and film history, and I am sort of curious about where there might be any overlap between your role as a litigator,
Oh, without a doubt.
which is a storytelling profession, and your visual storytelling, and how do you see the connection between those two worlds for yourself?
I can see a very direct connection. I was a solo practitioner, but there are a lot of lawyers that don't like to argue in front of a judge. So I was often hired to argue motions and tell the story that I want to have told. So I made most of my money as a solo practitioner, but I made side money by people that didn't feel comfortable getting up and speaking.
Oh, so you would do that for them?
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a story. What?
You were a performer?
Yes, yes. All the motion work you do in court is half performance. So you have to really convince why your client, well, my friend's client, needs relief. So I would argue on their behalf and tell their story. And that is part of being a litigator, is telling a compelling story that makes sense and within the law, taking your legal analysis into their personal lives and making a story out of it.
It's interesting you use the word motions
Yeah.
within the context
Yeah,
of law.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's mostly motion work for me. I never had to try my own case because they all settle. But when they actually had trials, I'd do all the motion work for other attorneys.
And you specialized in not maritime, but water-related law.
At first, water, and it's kind of dry. It's really complicated and dry. But I went on to, it's funny, I put my mother in a nursing home just this morning. I practiced litigation for elder abuse. So I was represented by elders and the abuse they suffered in nursing homes. So that's my first kind of career. I specialize in that. It's just kind of ironic that now I'm putting my mom in a nursing home and
Yeah.
the same day as I'm doing this talk.
So the title of this biennial is Backstories. And so I'm just...
I didn't get world record at all. I didn't even understand what it was supposed to be.
The last one was world record.
Yeah, and so I got some pieces at Miami University Art Museum. And they're like, no, just show us your best. I'm like, okay, good, because I don't know what world record is even supposed to mean. Is it, you know, it's kind of environmental. I kind of got that, but it could be anything. And
It's
it's
also
just
sort of an idea of like the twist on the word record and
Yeah.
record,
yeah,
which is what you do as a photographer.
I get it, but when I said it was backstories, I'm like, I got some good backstories now. I like to tell everyone here. And I have one at the Esquire Theater right now. If you haven't seen it, go take a look. It's a different backstory than this backstory. But this backstory also I wanted to incorporate, and this is some of the props. I wanted to incorporate, and I did it in California, but at a larger space, and I didn't have anything else I had to worry about. I just allowed to do whatever I wanted in this very large county arts council. So I did a lot of props and showed the history of the circus as the original performing arts, because it is the original performing arts, is the circus. Whether it's Egyptian or Indian, it was how, without words, mind you, it's the first performing art. It's actually circus. The original circus, like the European style circus, they didn't speak the same language. They didn't speak Latin. So they had to mime. They were hobos. They did dress in tatters because they were artists and performers. They got kicked out of Rome. And they mimed because they didn't know the language of, if they traveled 500 kilometers over, it's a different language. It was all regional languages. So that's why there's a miming aspect. That's why I tried to mime the very opening. Last week it didn't work too well because I couldn't talk anymore. So it's grown over time, and circus became more and more complex. Rome, it really peaked in Rome, but continued throughout other regions of Europe. And then back in Chile, when the circus came to Chile, it's a very European style of family circus. And they were a European, that's why when I found them in Calusa, California, it's like, I got my subject matter now. So, that's about it.
How did they, were you able to connect with them on how they handled a language barrier or how they interfaced with the local jurisdictions? Were they on like a pattern situation?
It's actually kind of a gang-like thing because there is one guy that controls the circuit of the family circus in Northern California. So he arranges for each other so they don't step on each other's toes. So it's kind of a syndicate in that way. How they pick the towns, I don't know. It's whoever controls the. It's very bizarre life. There are a lot of weird sponsorships too. I don't know if we want to hear about this kind of stuff.
Yes, please.
Well, there's one sponsor who is an evangelical Christian in Calusa, Spanish speaking though, and he sponsored them by giving them the raffle gifts. So they give free raffle tickets when you get in the circus. It's kind of what I did today. And I heard that his sermons were, I didn't go to them, but I heard that his sermons were based on a lot of these, being self-sustaining and not relying on car and technology. All these gifts that he were giving for the raffle were all like things that matched his sermons in Calusa. So it's like having a bicycle as a grand prize, or a good air conditioner as a grand prize. A lot of these people are migrant workers and they don't have these type of things. So by sponsoring the church, sponsoring the show, not only does he draw the Hispanic speaking local community and workers from Mexico, but they make money on the farms and they need entertainment, so they have the circus right in the middle of town. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. I was dressed as kind of a clown last week when it came to my opening, and I was miming it.
Okay.
But it's kind of hard to mime when you're trying to entertain guests. My previous show, I had jump ropes given to all the kids. It was a very family-friendly show. And I gave jump ropes to kids as gifts, and they were jumping rope, and they were just having a good old time. And I jumped a rope. I put a big stake in this log, and then put a big, long rope to cross the whole gallery, and had the people swing the ropes, and I have a double dutch with anyone that wanted double dutch with me on the rope. So, and that's what a lot of the jump roping is, really basic items that you can use for entertainment. Rope, it's easy. A couple balls. Yeah. Well, they use the same ropes in the building of the tent as they use in the performance of the show itself. I didn't develop much of a relationship. They trusted me. I didn't give any interviews. Some passing comments I would know. It was just observational knowledge, knowing who's who. The director of operations, the youngest brother, who kind of directs the whole. He directs the building of the tent, and he also directs the show. On that wall over there, you'll see how he's operational in building the tent and has various roles in the show. He plays 5, 6 different roles in the show as well, and he directs how the show is being paced as well. The only thing he ever told me was his grandfather doesn't speak English. His name was Carlo, I do remember that. And I showed Carlo some vitico, and he said, "Fantastico." That's the only thing he could say. And because they're all black and white, and it's colorful float. Circus are usually pretty colorful shows, but he was old school and he liked the black and white. That's why I really was impressed. And then my Johnny said, "You should hear the stories my father told me about Chile in the 50s, 60s." I was like, "I'd love to do that, but I was never able to do it." Anything else specific or even detailed? Yeah.
So a couple of times, like both instances, you said you wanted to know if they were a family circus, and like what was your attraction to a family circus as opposed to just a smaller traveling circus?
Well, with the family circus, you're able to define what their roles are depending on their age and gender, and generationally as well. They learn this through Grandpa. Grandpa's the one that's swinging the rope right there. So he's actually swinging the rope, and those are the 3 kids that are jumping it, and the hired hand is holding the other end of the rope. Now, the grandchildren are performers that tumble and contort. So you see the contortionist over there in that bottom contact print. So she's a contortionist because she's only 9 years old. There's no one at our age that can do what she does. Yeah, I want to understand the relationship between the children and how they respect the whole old school performance and how they develop over time. Then they become circus families themselves. Like one brother moved into a different circus because he married another circus performer. So it's pretty fascinating. The only exception was this. This is Boris. I asked him how he got his work permit to work in the United States. And he only gave me one word, and I knew what he meant. He said Prop 8. He's gay. So he is a hired hand. He's not really part of the family, but he's a hired hand. And I found out later when I followed him the next year, it was like that his husband/boyfriend was jealous of me because I was taking photographs of Boris. It's very bizarre, right? And Boris is the only one that actually gave me a bottle of wine. I gave them some stuff for when they opened their show. I tried to give them a bottle of wine, and they're like, no, we don't drink. I know, in fact, they do drink. This is where some knowledge of mine will come in handy for a talk. I know, in fact, they do drink because the 2 shows that were sponsored by the church had a little Christian message in it and a non-alcohol message in it. When I moved to the next town, what wasn't sponsored by this church, I saw them drink. And they also accepted Boris in, but Boris's boyfriend, husband, wasn't in the Calusa and Yuba City shows. So, because they had to hide that from the sponsor of that show. The next year, when the guy wasn't sponsoring it, and it was further south in Sacramento, now all of a sudden Boris's husband is there. But now Andrea, I didn't recognize her when I saw her 7 months later. Like, where's Andrea? She's right there. It's like, she was pregnant. That's why they had to hire someone else, because she was 6 months pregnant. So it's pretty fascinating to see how they keep this family going. And they just, there's some pictures maybe in here of the small son riding on the back of his mother, because the 2 grandmothers, one smoked and one had to use the bathroom. So they grabbed their tiny 6-month-old son, put him on their shoulders as they all danced around the metal arena. So they had to hold on to that kid so that mom could take a pee. Or the other one went out to smoke. So they had him dressed in an alligator costume and just jumped around the whole family dance, and then I didn't get a photo of that. I wish I had, but it's one of those moments where you're like, whoa, what's going on? Well, don't have time to do this. No, I'm telling too many stories. I know too much about it, and Paul warned me about that. Like, I know way too much about him. Boris is not in the family. Right. Everyone else is. Yeah. The daughter-in-law, the daughter, the 2 brothers, and the 2 brothers' wives. So it's about 7 or 8 performers, I believe, and Grandpa.
And Grandpa. Okay. So it's, and what kind of audiences did they get? Did they get big audiences, or they're pretty intimate?
I think in the spring, their audiences aren't as big because they're planting in Northern California. As you get through the summer and you get into harvest time, you'll get larger audiences before harvest, smaller audience after harvest, and smaller audiences way at the very beginning when they're planting, when all the Northern California are planting. So the size changes as the show goes on. And the size is always in the middle. It's always the largest, because that's when you have the most migrant workers coming in on temporary visas in the United States. So,
yeah. So that's mostly the audience is the local.
Or depending on, well, it's bilingual. So that adds to, like, the color changes in the town, because a lot of the white people will spend money on the circus. It's something new, Calusa, California. There's nothing else going on except for like the rodeo and whatever. You know, there are 2 things that go on in that town. The rodeo is one of the biggest ones, and Mexican wrestling and rodeo. So you got a diverse audience of both rich white people in Calusa who own the farms, and then you get all the migrant workers and locals that are Hispanic speaking. So you will get big audiences. In the spring, not so much. They're pretty slow. And in really hot summer, Sacramento gets 100, 110 degrees. Like in Redding, California, it's like, I mean, there was no one there. There were like maybe half a dozen people. I don't know how they get by.
Yeah. Wow. And they move all this stuff in trucks?
They have 2 large trucks, and then they have 5 vans where they live with their one daughter with the 2 performers, a different daughter with the 2 performers, and Grandma and Grandpa have their own truck, RV, and they live off it.
And this family's been doing this since the grandpa was...
Since the 1950s.
Wow.
And all the training is passed down. All the training is passed down.
Yeah.
They're not going to school, they're not.
No, they're going to school. They homeschool. I was able to figure that out by observation merely because I asked Andrea, what are you going to Sacramento for? He said, oh, I got to do something for my kids. And then I realized, hold on a second, all these permits are all county permits that she has for food service and safety. And so I finally realized that they had to go to Sacramento to probably make sure that homeschooling is being taken care of. And that's what you do in Sacramento because that's the state capital. So. Again, this is all observational. I don't have any written knowledge of this. It's just what I've observed. I went and followed him one last time, but the show it just wasn't fun. It was a totally stale show. I think it's a lot because two of the performers started the trapeze artists, and it was boring this time around. So, any other questions?
Did your presence affect the performance at all?
No.
I mean, nowhere in it did they were performing for you?
No. The first 2 times I paid, bought hot dog and popcorn because I need to eat too. I think after the 3rd performance, they're just go in. Just, you don't have to pay, So I still bought stuff to eat when I was there because that's how they make their money with the concessions. There's a line in here, in the would-be book, maybe one of these placards. $20, pays for admission. That's just enough for our oil and our electricity to make the concessions. So they make all their money on the actual concessions. Any weird trivia anyone wants to know about? Any of this? Like Paul was saying, I know way too much about it, but I tried to structure it the best I could. That's why we did it like a book form.
Have they seen the end results?
I invited them because my show in California went up in July of 2019, and they were close by. They were only about 40 miles away outside of LA. I invite them up. They are too busy even to go see a show because my show is at night. Their shows are at night. They don't have time to screw around by going to see my show. I had already given them a bunch of prints. I think I was in Lodi, and I gave him a big stack of prints. That's when he got a little weird with me. He's like, no, I want all the photographs. I'm like, no, sorry. He's like, no, I want all of them. I'm like, no, I'm sorry, dude. It's my work, He got a little miffed at that, but I played it cool. And so maybe, I just gave him some response, like, oh yeah, maybe. And then never saw him again. I make it up as I go along, kind of like they do. And that's a really interesting part about the way they separate these acts. These are very structured acts. Act 1 is him becoming a clown. He didn't do that in the next iteration, the next year. Act 2 is very structured act. It's her, the grace of her, and the beauty and speed of him, and then her again, the little kid, and then the musical aspect, and then another ropes performance on the end. Everything in between, they want to sell more concessions. And so what the main clown, Johnny, kicks the ball of the crowd and gets them all revved up and having fun. In reality, they're changing costumes for the second act. That's what's really going on. It's an hour and a half to 2. And then the improv would be in an intermission, because that's when the clown really improv. Does strange stuff that appeals to kids, mainly. The adults are buying the stuff, and the kids are having a good time by him doing silly things and kicking balls, and making them try to catch a plastic ball in a tiny hoop, and kids love that,
What kind of challenges did you have? Did you have any challenges? It's just like...
My bank account had challenges. I spent my life savings on that show, literally. I had to borrow money to finish the show. And luckily, a couple of benefactors in Sacramento who run the Viewpoint Photographic Arts Center volunteered to curate for me. And a woman that wanted me to rent her building as an attorney said that, oh, I'd like you to have an office in my building, but I'll give you this space. And I said, okay, so I used the space, and I moved to Cincinnati soon after that. So bank account was the biggest challenge. Something weird? Anyone want to know something weird?
Yeah.
Ask me.
Well, you referred to yourself the other day as doing literary photography,
Yeah, yeah.
and I would love to hear more about that.
It's kind of when I'm photographing a certain subject matter, or even street for that matter, which is what I'm mostly known for, is my street photography. It's like I see the story as it develops, and I can see where it's going, whether it's in my layout of the prints, or whether it's in this, my layout of the whole process of the building of the tent, performance of the show, taking down the tent. I see it, I mean, I can see the thread while I'm looking at it, and I know it's very important. Naming things is very important to me, and naming it gives it meaning. So when I say literary photography, it means I have training in storytelling, you know, as a lawyer, as a photographer, as a film critic. So I kind of chart it out like a book. This is called, the one with the Esquire is called Nightlife in Renderville. And that backstory is about how after my brain injury, I had to learn how to use a camera again. And so my sister was taking care of me. I had this brand new A7 I had just bought before the accident. I had to learn how to use that camera. I had to learn how to use the camera all over again. I didn't know anyone in Ukiah, California. My sister was a public defender there. She just stayed, took care of me after I got out of the hospital. So I just roamed the streets at night taking photographs just to learn how to use the camera again. That's my backstory on that one. And I created a town called Renderville. My feed is Renderville because I found out there was a town called Renderville years ago. It's no longer being used. And so I'm the only Renderville in the world, and it doesn't even exist. Yeah, I shoot in black and white. At one point I was doing this. It was in RAW and JPEG. And then I couldn't keep up with buying SD cards, like, or discs. I was going to Walmart to buy 2 or 3 SD cards, just because I had so many photographs. I was like going broke again on this project. So I changed it to JPEG because it takes up less room.
So it's Sony black and white?
Black and white.
In camera?
Correct. There's a setting on Sony where you can just switch it to monochromatic. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have any other question, I'm more than happy to talk. I talk a lot. Thank you. And